Hello and welcome to Original Soundchat, where video game music is a work of art. On each episode, it's our goal to help you learn about two soundtracks from the world of games, as well as the people, stories, and critical tracks behind them. My name is Joe DeVader.
And I'm Peter Spezia. We're brought to you by Anonymous Dinosaur and Rhymes with Asia. It's time to appreciate great OSTs and the games they come from, without getting too bogged down in music theory. Up first this week for our two games is 2011's Catherine, the game with an adult relationship focus from the creative team, especially the composer, behind and following Persona 4.
After that, it's the 2011 indie darling Bastion, a soundtrack that basically raised the bar for the indie games that came after it.
Good to be back this week, coming off last week with Katamari and Wind Waker, two very kind of interesting games with bold artistic styles. And in this time it's two games from the same year. How about that?
That was not intentional, by the way, for those listening. We didn't realize that until about 10 minutes ago.
But hey, it works. It's coming from different elements of the game industry. I mean, Bastion is easily an indie standout from that year. And Catherine has its own sort of interesting history that kind of walks that AAA, AA sort of space. So very interesting as well. I wanted to start out with talking about Catherine this week, though, because, when this episode comes out, it's kind of right around the time where Catherine Full Body is coming out in Japan. And that's the kind of director's cut, additional content sort of version 8 years after the game's release. I mean, I think it was February 17th, 2011 in Japan. And then it was July later that year for the United States for the original Catherine. But I think it has a very interesting soundtrack, and it's a game worth talking about, certainly. So I wanted to start with that one this week in particular. So Catherine is interesting in a lot of ways because you and I are both fans, Joe, of Persona 4.
Very much.
And so Atlas and the Persona team behind it, when they were kind of wrapping up that development, they were working on what was Atlas's first game for HD consoles at the time. And it was in a way a test for them to see the next Persona game, we're going to be making it for PlayStation 3, at least. What is that like? What are the challenges behind it? And hey, we want to try something a little more adult in this sense. So Catherine, for those that don't know, is a game that is fundamentally about a love triangle and human relationships. This is the story of the game, essentially, where you, as Vincent Brooks, have to make a decision between the, kind of settling down for the rest of your life with your girlfriend of 5 years. And then there's the fling of the one night stand or the desires of bachelordom. And it's kind of the decision between those two lives. The story of that is set in that sense, but the gameplay, the actual gameplay of it is a puzzle game where you're trying to climb a tower and you're moving blocks along, and you can only climb a block when it's like a stair, essentially, or you get different items where you can like jump up multiple levels. But it's this odd puzzle mechanic that's, in a way, they say it's very Kubertian in nature, to borrow a line from that classic Mega 64 skit.
It is kind of 100% Qbert.
Yeah, so it's drastically different between this fascinating story versus gameplay that I personally disdain. I'll drop it down to like the easiest possible difficulty, which like it'll give you items that you can bound up like 4 levels at a time.
I do like the gameplay, the puzzle gameplay in Catherine a good bit, actually, surprisingly, when I think back on it. But I do agree that it's not the main draw of Catherine.
Mm-hmm.
And it should also be noted that these puzzle levels are based around a sort of nightmare aesthetic. It's him having a nightmare, basically.
Right. So that's the gist of the game, essentially. How it was received and developed back then in, before 2011, but it's released in 2011. When Persona 4 was finishing up, there was the kind of the early plans for Catherine. And its core team was made up of a lot of these notable names from the Persona team and Persona 4 specifically. So you have Katsura Hashino, who's the director and producer, actually. There's Shigenori Soejima, who is the character designer. And then Shoji Meguro, who is the composer, who we'll talk about more, of course, as we talk about the soundtrack for this game. As I mentioned, is the first Atlus game to be featured on an HD console, and they really discovered a lot of the debugging issues between the 360 and PS3 versions. It wasn't like PS4 and Xbox One now, where they're both very similar x86 PC architectures with slight differences there. With the cell processor on PS3 and the Xbox's architecture, a lot of weird things to work out. And so that was problematic for development, pushed it back a little bit. So they were really focusing on the adult theming, as I also mentioned, where it was really trying to focus on a different demographic. And Hashino even said that it was really only Atlus that probably would have approved a game like this. So it was really bold in its vision at the time. We talked about what Catherine essentially is, but because it was this focus on relationships and sex and marriage and things like that, one of the interesting things about Catherine in particular, especially during the 360 and PS3 era, was they had different cover arts for each. So on the PS3 version was the Catherine with a C, the more lusty, younger version, where cleavage on display, Vincent is there between the boobs.
That's the one I have.
Likewise. I think, I got it digitally, so I don't technically have it.
I felt super weird buying that so Catherine came out like the year I graduated high school. And so I still didn't feel like an adult when I bought it.
Right.
So I kind of felt like I need to make sure my parents don't see this, when my dad wouldn't have cared. But like, it was that kind of thing.
Yeah, no, I hear you there. On the 360 version, it was Catherine with the K, the marriage sort of type, where she's kind of on her front lowered with her bottom raised, kind of focusing a little more on the ass, as it were. So yeah, they were definitely designed to be eye-catching in the stores, certainly. But to have such drastic cover arts to talk about, in a way, the two different types of routes that the story could take, was certainly an interesting idea at the time. But because of that, the focus on the sexual theming there, Atlus had to be very aggressive in making their point that the game was okay to sell in American retailers, because America, we love our violence. We are a little uneasy about sex,
which is really weird.
And it's totally backwards to most of the world, but that's just how it is. Walmart and Target apparently were infamous for saying, "Oh, we don't know, we might not stock this," and Atlus had to show them scenes of like the worst it got and say like, this is really how it is. An alternative was also to zoom in on the cover art, so it would focus just more on their face. And maybe you've seen that variation of the box art, but like on Amazon when the game was sold there, this was the box art they used. So those that didn't want to play up the original Japanese and usually American cover art that focused on those sexual aspects, we'll just zoom in on the girl's face and that'll be good enough. The game was received rather well as far as reviews goes. And there was actually kind of an esports scene that was kind of floating around for a while. And I'm sure in some corners of the world still goes with the puzzle mechanics and races and things like that.
Oh yeah, it's officially like a side tournament at EVO Japan this year.
Wow.
a Catherine tournament. It became huge, especially in the fighting game sort of community, as just like, I've never watched a Catherine tournament at EVO. They're like a big, huge deal every year. They're apparently some of the most hype tournaments in the entire event. Mm-hmm. So one of these days I'm going to have to watch one, but they're apparently amazing to watch.
For sure. And it's definitely coming back on the full front because of Catherine Full Body, as you mentioned. Adding the third content path of Reen, and not Catherine with a Q, as some internet personalities predicted. But yeah, so that's going to be interesting to see how that's played out, because there's definitely been some controversy in the past of do they handle certain topics appropriately, especially with Japanese culture and when it comes across to a Western audience and different sensibilities and things like that. So it's going to be interesting to see how that comes over. Catherine Full Body, not confirmed for a Western release yet, but this kind of happened with the original Catherine, where it's like, oh, we don't know if it'll come out in the West or even Europe, the PAL regions, and then it eventually does. We'll even see if it takes the Persona Q2 route. Just recently, Persona Q2 for 3DS was confirmed for the West after coming out a couple months ago in Japan, but they decided that we're not going to do the localization. You're just going to get the Japanese voiceover with subtitles, and definitely a route that could be taken with Catherine Full Body, even though the localization at the time was really well done, with Troy Baker playing Vincent, had Michelle Ruff as Catherine with the K, Laura Bailey, Catherine with the C. Just really good performances. I mean, Travis Willingham, Yuri Lowenthal, just really good performances in that game all around. Kirk Thornton plays a really interesting role. So a good dub and localization at the time. I guess they had some freedom to ad-lib certain lines, because there were, like, let's say, quotes in the transition screens that were really Japanese proverbs in a way, and they had to find the best way to kind of translate that for a Western audience. Or, gosh, some of my favorite moments is like the beer facts or the alcohol facts when you're in the Stray Sheep. Like, that's something to remember as well. Really good localization job there, but I just wonder how it will be done for Full Body.
I think that's gonna depend on how well it sells over there, because the main reason Q2 is not getting localized is because it apparently bombed extremely hard in Japan, because it's on the 3DS and people are moving on from the 3DS, and I don't know what they were expecting.
Yeah, no, that's pretty accurate. It's a good point. But let's talk about Catherine's soundtrack, and it really starts and ends with Shoji Meguro. So won't be the last time we talk about Mr. Meguro, but
boy, will it not.
But to start things off here in this third episode of the show, let's give the background info. He's born on June 4th, 1971 in Tokyo. He is primarily known as a guitarist as far as the instruments he's proficient in, but he also plays piano. He preferred to listen to classical music growing up instead of pop. And then when he was in junior high and gained an interest in writing music and performing music, he transitioned to listening to jazz. And so that kind of makes sense with like jazz and classical kind of upbringing, not only just informing how he composes and the styles he chooses, but also this soundtrack in general for Catherine. Oddly enough, he majored in hydrodynamics at the College of Industrial Technology at Nihon University. So
that's a safety net major if I've ever seen one.
Man, like if that music thing doesn't work out, you can work in hydrodynamics. But he was hired by Atlus in 1995, and he first contributed to the soundtrack for Revelations Persona, which is also known as the first Persona game for PlayStation, the first PlayStation, obviously. He wrote 16 songs for the game, and the one that ended up being really the staple for the series is Aria of the Soul, which was the title at the time, but now everyone knows it as the Velvet Room theme, or the poem for everyone's souls. That's become the staple in the Persona franchise. Everyone who plays those games knows that theme. And so that's his doing originally. He had an interesting quote that I found regarding the use of English in some of the songs that he works on. A lot of Persona songs, especially, use English lyrics sung by the Japanese singers. So it definitely has a sort of English feel to it, an English sound. And that, some people who, when it's not their sort of thing, they kind of knock it for that. Mm-hmm. But, it really works, and it's very catchy in certain ways, at least coming from an English perspective.
A lot of the lyrics don't make sense, but that does not, like, make the song any less catchy or... I mean, there are other franchises with the same problem. Go listen to a Crush 40 song. None of those lyrics make sense. Like, it's not a new sort of concept. I kind of agree that, like, people knock it for that, and that's not really fair.
But coming from a Japanese perspective, Meguro says that due to the Japanese people not fully understanding the language, being English, it helped create music that was not as distracting to them as Japanese would be. Which is really interesting if you think about it. Like, if you're playing an English game and it has English lyrics, like, yeah, you maybe, catching on to those lyrics, having them in your head, and then you're not as focused on the game per se. But then if it's Japanese or something else, like, that may just not, yeah, it's a good point. It may not be as distracting. I had never thought of it that way from the Japanese lens.
I think I've thought of it that way mainly in like I'll listen to music in Japanese sometimes if I'm trying to concentrate on something, because when it's a language you don't speak, obviously you don't have words to like latch onto. There's nothing for your brain to connect to. That of course gets broken if you like watch a lot of anime and stuff. And then even though you might not know what the words mean, you still recognize them as words. And so then your brain starts latching onto those. But I totally get what he's saying. And yeah, that's actually really smart.
Mm-hmm. So Shoji Meguro and his discography is one of Atlus's biggest composers. So he's known for a lot of Atlus games. As we mentioned, the Persona series. Interesting that he didn't seem to work as a composer on the two Persona 2 games, but he was the game director for the remakes on PSP.
That's really weird.
Yeah, but I mean, Persona 3, 4, 5, the different spin-offs. I helped on the original Persona game. Like, he's known primarily for that. He's helped on and led certain Shin Megami Tensei projects. Like, particularly 3 Nocturne was one of the ones that he started to lead the composition team for. Digital Devil Saga, Devil Summoner, etc. Different Shin Megami Tensei games there. And also the Trauma Center series. So, Under the Knife, Second Opinion, Trauma Team, I think will be one we eventually talk about on this show. So again, it won't be the last time we hear about Shoji Meguro. When it comes to the development history for the soundtrack for Catherine, interesting facts here. 2009 was when the first demo tracks were worked on a little bit. When Katsura Hashino, the director, wanted certain themes for his music. He had different ideas in mind. Just he wanted it to be classic, but also adult-oriented and erotic. So Meguro said that this didn't really give him much freedom as far as the different creativity that it could be done for the project in particular. So in Catherine's soundtrack, the genre that's used kind of depends on the setting for the game. When you're climbing the tower in those nightmares at night, they're remixes of really well-known classical music, symphonies and different pieces like that. So not original compositions by Meguro, but remixes and arrangements of those classic symphonic pieces. There's more jazz and kind of a slower pace when it's quiet in the bar and when you're in the daytime at the Stray Sheep. And then definitely symphonic pieces for the cutscenes, which is it's a little more classic filmic sort of style there. Because there was an outside company for the animation, I mean, Persona 4, the game before it, had maybe 30 minutes of total cutscene animations. Catherine, a lot more. So Meguro didn't have as much freedom again because he wasn't really able to sync the music to just, something in general. There was an outside animation coming in that he had no control over and had to sync the music to that. So Catherine was a new game for the studio and for the composing team in a lot of ways, but I think it really worked out well. When it comes to the 5 critical tracks for the game, I think we got to start. I don't want to add too many of these classical compositions for the tower. But if there's one I had to pick, it would be Mussorgsky's Pictures at an Exhibition.
Yeah, this is the one.
This is the one that's used in marketing for the game. It's just the most prominent one. I mean, you hear this one, it's like, yep, this is Catherine's classical music usage, essentially.
I didn't realize that this was a classical song until playing this game. That's the thing about being uncultured swine like myself. You don't know that most of this is stuff from Chopin and Mussorgsky and stuff like that. So, like, my first time hearing this piece was in a Catherine trailer. And I remember, like, very clearly being awake way later than I should have been at the time. Because I had just finished Persona 3 and 4. And I was thinking, oh, man, the Persona people are making this game? Oh, yeah, this was the classic one to pick if you only had to pick one. Because this is the one you heard the most, whether it be in marketing, whether it be in the game, just in general.
Yeah, it really defines the soundtrack in that way. This plays on night 4 of the Nightmares, where you are running away from a demon baby that is trying to climb after you and call you daddy. And it's, of course, representing the fear of Vincent being tied down and possibly having kids with Catherine with a K. But still just a creepy kid.
I think that's a succinct description.
I mean, there are other certainly more nightmare fuel sort of levels there, but that's one that is definitely prominent in the game. As far as the music goes, it's the constant beat of the pressure that's really driving the urge to climb, essentially. It keeps that tension high, but when the beat goes away, it's a lot of horror theming and strings going back and forth to reinforce the nightmare. So it's an interesting give and take there. I mean, when you're talking about remixes of songs like Holst's Planet Suite with Mars and Jupiter, that doesn't have the same sort of feel of like, oh my God, like I gotta get away from this thing and the nightmare to it. I mean, it's a very, very different song, but this one really plays up the nightmare well. And I think that's probably why they use it in all the marketing material. Second critical track, I'm going to go with Also sprach Brooks. Yeah, this is another really classic defining song from this soundtrack. It's the main theme for The Stray Sheep in the bar. It's lounge jazz, and it's like the perfect bar or coffee shop theme music with that piano. If I were an individual that spent time in places like that, I would just want this on loop, essentially. I even always remember it where tinkering around with HTC Vive at one point, and they have sort of like different themes for like the home space that you kind of start the VR in. A lot of like user generated sort of things where it's like, oh, they create this sort of environment for you to be in, and oh, this music plays, and someone made a Stray Sheep with this music, and it's just like, oh, perfect. Yes, absolutely.
That sounds awesome. The Stray Sheep is one of my favorite, like, I have a real fascination with bar locations like that.
Or like bar culture, yeah.
Yeah, in like fiction, because I can't handle it. Real bars aren't like that.
They're loud and they're annoying.
Yeah, like you're never going to find a real bar like that. Not here, at least.
Right.
But this like perfectly encapsulates it. I have Stray Sheep coasters
Oh, awesome.
Though, like, most of them are gone. I need to buy more. If I had a bar, this is what would play on loop. And people would get really mad at me, but that wouldn't stop me.
No, they can't hate on this track. Like, this is too good. And yet there needs to be more bars where it's just like chill and music down quite enough so the conversation can go. There needs to be more places like that. I'm with you for sure. Third critical track is going to be Stage. It's a simply titled track, and most players might not actually hear it because it takes place during these optional babble side missions where it's like more sort of climbing levels that aren't tied into the main game story. But this song just goes hard.
Can confirm, by the way, until I was listening to it from this outline earlier this week, I'd never heard this song. I've never done Babel. Actually, no, I heard it in the Persona 5 Catherine DLC.
Ding, ding, ding. That's where they brought it back, is with that DLC.
But they didn't bring the Hallelujah chorus back as the victory theme. I'm still mad about that.
No, they didn't do that for Battle of Victory.
Cowards!
This really goes hard, though, with the distorted bass and the synths. And, like, it's the most Persona-like song from Meguro on this whole soundtrack. And that's probably why they brought it to Persona 5 as the Catherine DLC battle track. But it's fantastic.
I could absolutely hear this being in, like, Persona 3.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It has a more Persona 3 than Persona 4 vibe to me, but I could see it being in either one of those games, 100%.
Mm-hmm. Especially with the vocal that comes in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of sounds like almost Persona 4 final boss-ish like. But yeah, as far as just general theme, you're right. 3 would be probably a better fit. But yeah, it's an odd fit in Catherine, but it's just one that, not a lot of people would ever listen to because it's kind of sequestered off in that side content. The fourth critical track, though, we're going to go It's a Golden Show. And so this is the title screen, and it's an odd beginning because like it's this slow piano kind of dark tone at the beginning where they're kind of setting up the premise of like, you're about to go into a world where this happens, but then it's this catchy TV golden playground like theme where it's this jazzy electric piano, the bass kicks in, the trumpet melody will get stuck in your head for a long time. It's definitely a really good earworm like that.
This is my favorite song in the game by far, 100% in all ways. And I hadn't actually listened to it by itself until years after playing this game. And I don't understand why I didn't, because this song is so good. It's the piano part. It's the trumpets when it finally like really kicks up. Like the instant the piano and like the beat and everything kicks up, when the faster part like takes over is probably like, it's one of those songs that makes me think, man, I really need to learn how to play piano.
She's just like, let's go. Yeah, it's a hype build for sure. It's really good. It's up there for a lot of people, but you gotta definitely mention it. Just like you gotta mention the fifth critical track here. Yo.
Yo, yo 夢でキャンセルし One, two, three, get sucked in my sheets これは現実それか dream 混ざる蜜と濃厚なクリーンつながる仕組みは変と変人との関係はエンドエン原点とゴー結ぶ点と点あとはセンスで決まる運命の運命 Left か right か前後左右 Move the brick Step up して解いてく trick Man you gotta fight for your chick でももいるからできない
Yeah, what?
Yo. This is one where, like, I think a lot of people could find something to knock about it.
It's bizarre.
It really is.
It is a bizarre song.
There's censoring in it. There's a moment where it's beeped out, which is a little weird. But whenever I think of the Catherine soundtrack, I think of this. If I don't think of Pictures at an Exhibition first, because this is like the startup song on PS3 when you kind of hover over and it plays a little bit of the soundtrack. Depends on how the game is set up. But yeah, you're hearing that yo. Also, shout outs to the newer full body version of this song. As sick as the beat is on the original, this one kind of fleshes out the instrument a little bit more. You get the female rapping in there as well. So it's kind of just an overall better and wider experience. But there's something to be said about this one, the original, to talk about just the range of styles and what comprises the Catherine soundtrack.
I hadn't heard this version yet.
It's pretty darn good.
That was pretty good.
Mm-hmm. So, Joe, what would you have on the cutting room floor? How does that list look to you?
For me, I agree that like keeping it down to one of the classical compositions was a good idea. But if I had to pick one, it surprisingly would not be Pictures at an Exhibition. It would have been the Revolutionary Etude.
Yeah, and that's a good one. It's Chopin. It's the final boss stage. So yeah.
I mean, again, piano.
yeah. No.
I like piano a lot. What can I say?
Intense piano. I mean, that's a Chopin staple.
So that's the only one I got. I adore that song. I think that is my second favorite song, right behind Golden Show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it's a very good one for sure. I was teetering between Battle on Stage. Which is another very Persona-like song. I prefer like the harder sort of distortion there on stage. But that's another Babel song. So again, not a lot of people are going to hear that one. And then Lamb Game Between Male and Female. Which is this kind of more sultry, it's not like porn music, but it's like almost like porn music. But it's definitely that kind of erotic theming that Hashino was looking for. So it's just an interesting choice. But I mean, I was already kind of limited there with those 5 songs. But those would probably be the ones that I would have on the cutting room floor. What will I never forget about this game? It's the fact that you learn about alcohol in the Stray Sheep. I think we talked about it, but the Stray Sheep is one of those like defining sort of like home base sort of things. It makes you feel like you want to kind of live in that world and have that kind of part of the world become your reality in a way, even though it's just not here in American bar culture. It's just too loud, and you wish to have the stray sheep. But I mean, what other game? It's like, I noticed you were about to finish your drink, but let's learn about this type of alcohol. Did you know that?
It's such a nice little quirky touch too.
Yeah.
Like it gives so much personality to everything.
It just kind of breaks up everything. I won't forget how much I do not like the puzzle elements, and I'm good with most puzzle games, but it's just like, I wish it were all about the story, because the story is fantastic. I think it still holds up as one of the more intriguing sort of narrative choice games. Do you remember what ending you got when you played?
I got one of the Catherine with a C endings.
Interesting.
But I need to go replay Catherine very badly because, like I said earlier, I don't think I was in a position to really appreciate the themes and such behind Catherine when I played it, because this game came out in 2011, 2 months after I graduated high school.
Right.
And I had not been in a relationship at any point. I didn't have any adult experience with like just adult life in general at that point. And I don't think I was in the right part of my life to appreciate and like be able to answer the questions as not a stupid horn dog teen. And I think if I went back, I don't know what ending I'd get if I went back nowadays, but I'm stuck between replaying it now or just waiting for the eventual release of Full Body. I don't know which I'm going to do.
Yeah. Yeah, I think Full Body will be a good time to jump back in, especially with the added range. In the original Catherine, there were 9 endings. For those that don't know, you could have gone the K route, the C route, and then there was like a freedom route where you basically chose neither, like you didn't commit one way or the other. So there are 3 variations for each of those. There's a bad, a good, and a true ending for each of those paths. So that makes 9 total.
I believe I got the good ending for Catherine with a C.
Yeah. So I got the good ending for Catherine with a K when I played. And that was, so 2011 would have been, I was out of university undergrad for a year. So yeah, I guess technically an adult, but yeah, still too long ago. A lot's changed since then. So I would definitely be up for playing it again. That's for sure. Also good to note that this week, both games came out in 2011, but both these games we also both played for the first time on our show here. So that'll be good to compare. We both played Catherine. We both played our next game. Before we transition to that, though, I'd like to give a special mention to a person from OC Remix or YouTube who's covered a song from the soundtrack. We like to do that when we're transitioning or outroing the show. So for Catherine on YouTube, there's Nigato on YouTube, who did a cover of Also Sprach Brooks. And he did instead of piano, he did electric guitar. And it sounds great, and he played it pretty much flawlessly. So check out this guitar cover of Also Sprach Brooks, and we'll be right back.
So let's get into my game. My game is, as said earlier, the 2011 indie game Bastion.
Yeah.
Now, if you've never heard of Bastion, it came out in July of 2011, which I believe is really close to when Catherine came out too. So we might have even gotten like within a month of each other.
Not even that. Within a week. It was July 26th, 2011.
Wow. That was not planned. That's awesome.
Good stuff.
That's actually crazy to think about. Wow. It was released for Xbox 360, and then later on, it was released on PC on December 9th of the same year, which I didn't know. I always thought that it came out on Xbox and PC at the same time. Shows what I know.
Back then, they were doing more of like an indie push on 360, the summer of games and all that, so that makes sense.
So it's the debut game of Supergiant Games and was actually published by Warner Brothers. Supergiant has become a massive figure in indie games nowadays, with their announcements for new games just being like getting wild numbers of people hyped. Their latest game got announced at the Game Awards, being Hades, which looks awesome, and I can't wait.
Yeah, it's early access for free on the Epic Game Stores, so that's something I got to check out for sure.
Bastion itself was actually made by a team of 7 people that worked between California and New York City, literally the two most extremes they could have gotten while staying in the country. Actually, no, I guess they could have been in Hawaii. I don't know. But it took 2 years to make. The team itself was founded by 2 people that used to work at EA. You hear that a lot in indie games, where it's like, we used to work for this big company that most people agree isn't good.
And it drained the soul out of us.
So we went and made our own thing. And you hear that a lot. It's a problem. But, I mean, if it gets us really good indie games and gets those people out of those studios, I mean, sure.
Also shouts out to Greg Kasavin, who is the creative director he did, Bastion, Transistor, and Pyre, and also the writer. So, like, a lot of the creative force behind this game, Greg Kasavin, for at least, 10 years, was, the executive editor at GameSpot.com.
That I didn't know.
He was, the big deal. And when you get to be old like me, it's certain names from back then. It's like, oh yeah, the Matt Casmassinas and Boson for IGN. And it was Greg Kasavin at GameSpot. So he went to Supergiant and is the driving force. And so when these games come out and he goes and it's doing essentially the PR work essentially for these different things, it's like, oh man, it's like old memories and good times there.
See, that I didn't know, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't actually look into Kasavin a whole lot. I looked a little bit into Amir Rao and Gavin Simon, who were the founders of Supergiant, the ex-employees of EA, but there's not a lot of information that I can give you on them right now. What I can tell you is that Bastion was a runaway hit, mainly became famous, got a lot of attention for its unique method of storytelling, in which there is a narrator who reacts to things you are doing in the game. To an extent, obviously. It's not like we have an AI that's narrating you all the time. It's if you do a certain thing, the narrator will comment on it, and he's got this golden voice provided by Logan Cunningham, and it's just such a cool way of telling a story. And unfortunately, as much as I love Bastion, I don't think it would have gotten as much attention as it did without that. So that was a good move, but it also became massively notable for its really incredible soundtrack. It sold over 3 million copies by 2015.
Wow.
And won a ton of awards. It won Best Original Score and Best Song in a Game at the Spike Video Game Awards, and then a ton of others past that. It won awards at GDC. It won awards in the Indie Game Association. It was just lauded the whole time it was out. So the music was all done by Darren Korb. Now this week it is my turn to not have a huge amount of information on. In fact, this is less information I think than either of us have ever gotten on anybody so far.
Oh, I don't know. We'll see.
Darren didn't really do stuff before this. So he was born on November 5th, 1983 in San Jose, California. And he started singing and playing guitar pretty much from a young age, which seems to be a theme that we've gotten for most of these composers. When you get into music, you get into music really early. Mm-hmm. He went to New York University and majored in music and music business. He worked, according to him, on small TV and film projects, but did nothing of real note. I can't find anything that he did. He just mentions that he did some work for this stuff. Obviously not in a notable fashion, I guess. He also had a small number of jobs, including, as he puts it, charting songs for the Rock Band Network.
Oh man, is that a deep cut? Holy cow.
Yeah, that's interesting. Amir Rao, one of the founders of Supergiant, was actually a childhood friend of his. They met when they were 8 years old. And when Rao founded Supergiant, he went to Darren and said, hey, we're making a game. Do you want to make the music and do the sounds and all that? And Darren was like, yeah, sure. He not only did all the music, he also did the sound effects. He directed all the voice acting.
Oh, wow.
Because like it was a small team. They had 7 people. And so he basically just took on the sound director in all ways.
I mean, it kind of makes sense when you have a small team like that. Yeah, you can't go asking for big names, especially when you're unproven. So that's a hell of a connection to have from your childhood.
He's the guy who brought on Logan Cunningham. He also brought in Ashley Barrett, who provided the voice of one of the characters as well as just vocals, and continues to supply vocals in Supergiant games to this day.
Just does a killer job. Fantastic.
She's so good. She's so talented. So, like I said, doesn't really have a discography. He didn't really do anything before composing Bastion. He has, of course, been the composer on pretty much every Supergiant game since then. Did Transistor, he did Pyre, I believe he did Hades, but it's not listed on his Wikipedia article. But I'm pretty sure that's still him.
It would make sense, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he'd actually never worked in sound for video games at all whatsoever when he began composing for Bastion. This was a completely new experience for him.
Wow. That's amazing, because it is such a good soundtrack.
So, Tone of Bastion was decided very early on, and Korb actually got access to everything basically from the start. So he knew exactly what they needed, exactly what they wanted, and they said, make something that fits this. So he just went with that, and he decided what he wanted to make was what he describes as acoustic frontier trip hop, which is a heck of a combination of words, but yeah, that sounds about right.
It's incredibly spot on, for sure.
He wanted to combine heavily sampled beats with acoustic elements like guitars and all sorts of other instruments. As seems to be a recurring pattern for the people that I choose to talk about, he didn't want to make anything that anybody had already done. If you're having deja vu from the Katamari episode, me too. But it was basically the same thing. He wanted to make a soundtrack that didn't sound like anything else that anybody else was doing. The music was technically made to loop, but he made it so that it wasn't what he described as being wall to wall. So it didn't levels in Bastion don't just have the same song all throughout, like you would expect from games of that type. The music changes if you get in a fight. They change if you walk into a certain area. And that wasn't really a thing indie games did. Other games did that plenty. But small games like this, that wasn't really something that a lot of them did very often. It was, you're in this area, this is the music that plays. That's what you get.
Yeah, and for the description's sake, I mean, Bastion is an isometric adventure brawler kind of game. So yeah, you have this kind of angle that you're viewing the world that's kind of being built around you as you move through it. And so, yeah, you're going between moments of exploration, traversal, and battling with your big hammer or other weapons that you have. So, yeah, that's absolutely where the narration can come in and sort of change up the music a little bit. Yeah, so it's really, really interesting way of design.
It should be noted, on a design standpoint, the level building in front of you was actually them trying to make it so that the player always knew where they had and hadn't been to keep them from getting lost in levels. And then the apocalyptic sort of story angle, because in this game you are playing as one of the survivors of an apocalyptic event that killed everyone. That whole thing was put in specifically to justify why the level was rising and building itself in front of you.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of cool, I think, from a game design standpoint in general.
Totally worked.
So while vocals weren't really something a lot of games, especially indie games, did, which is another flashback to Katamari, vocals just weren't a thing a lot of games in this era did. He still wanted to do it because he decided that he had a background in songwriting, and what's he not going to use it? So he wrote some songs. He brought on Ashley Barrett, who, again, super talented vocalist. She provided the vocals for 2 of the songs. The other male vocalist on the album that is not on a bonus track is Darren Korb himself.
Oh, interesting.
Meanwhile, Logan Cunningham even had a song on the album, on the actual like downloadable OST that you can get off Bandcamp. It's a bonus song. It's not actually in the game, but he does have one where he also provided the vocals for it. But for the most part, in game, any of the vocals you hear are either Ashley Barrett or Darren Korb.
Very interesting.
All right, let's get into 5 critical tracks.
All right.
So this was hard. Picking these 5 was hard. This is a short soundtrack compared to a lot of other games, but they're all so good. This whole soundtrack is incredible. But the first one that really, really drives home the tone that Bastion is going for would be In Case of Trouble. It's just a lot of acoustic guitar. It's one of the first songs you hear in the first level of the entire game. The feeling that I get from it is sort of a lonely and yet like motivated to keep on moving forward feel to it.
Yeah, it's kind of like the basic fundamentals sort of what the soundtrack will build to. I mean, when you're talking about that acoustic frontier hip hop, you kind of like have to start small as the adventure begins and then build up to something greater.
Yeah, it starts off pretty quiet, and it, like the song itself does that. It starts off very quiet and it builds up to being a bit more intense, sort of, though it never like reaches the like heavy beats and stuff that other songs in the game hit, but it drives home the tone perfectly, and it's just a really, really good piece. After that, you've got the song that you probably hear more often in Bastion than any other song in the game, being Terminal March. Terminal March is the song that plays whenever you encounter a boss, pretty much, quote unquote, or like a bunch of enemies at once, or some really big dramatic part is happening. It involves you say you think it's a sitar.
I think so.
I don't know if it's that or a mandolin. I don't know what instrument it is, but whatever it is, it's cool. And it's got a really, really like catchy sort of tune that it plays, and when it's not playing that, it's just this heavy beat.
Oh, it's so heavy. You gotta have this one on here for sure.
It's the song you hear more than anything else on the soundtrack when you're playing the game.
Absolutely. But yeah, it's that instrument spread from that heavy bass to that stringed instrument. I feel like with the warbling, it's more sitar-like than mandolin-like. But yeah, it's a really memorable song for sure.
After that, we've got Slinger's Song. Which is one of my personal favorites, and when you say like this game has a pseudo-western feel, yeah, Slinger's Song, that's as pseudo-western as it gets.
You're talking this song for sure, yeah.
Where It feels like something that would be playing in a scene where two people in the middle of an Old West town are getting ready to have a shoot-off.
Let's put it this way. This could fit almost just as well in Red Dead Redemption, which came out the year before.
Yeah. Yeah, pretty much. I don't really have anything else to say about it. It's a simple piece. There's not much to it. But I want to, like, pull out a revolver. I don't actually want to pull out a revolver. I don't have one. I don't want one. But, like, it just has that feel.
Yeah, it gives you that mental imagery for sure.
This town ain't big enough for the two of us. And all that stuff.
You got the slide guitars going, whether it's on the low end and then the higher pitches on the guitar. It's so good.
And then you got the most, in my opinion, well, not the most, the second most important song on the entire soundtrack. Number 4 is Build That Wall.
Someday those tears are gonna spill. So build that wall and build it strong, 'cause we'll be there before too long.
This song is so good. It is the first song you hear with vocals in it in the game. It's a sudden like change in game too, like in context, because it's played in the context of, wait, what? I thought I was alone here. Somebody's singing a song. What? And then you meet your first other survivor that's not the kid or Rux, who is the narrator. You meet Zia. And Zia is a girl that was raised in the city, but has heritage in the natives, basically. Who the whole game is framed around. There's a big, huge dispute between these two. It's basically colonists and the natives. It's the same sort of story. And this song is a war anthem. This song sounds like something that the Ura, which are the name of the natives, would sing sitting around a fire while they're waiting to, like, we're going to show those Ceylandians what's up. We're going to take them down. They're going down. And just a mixture of Ashley Barrett's vocals and the really, really nice acoustic guitar part, of course, provided by Korb himself. This song is so good. It's the one that won Best Song at the Spike Game Awards, which 100% deserved.
Mm-hmm.
And the vocals were recorded in a closet, as is usually the case for smaller productions like this. Because, fun fact, if you're like recording vocals or like voiceover stuff, and you don't have a professional recording studio, you have a closet with clothes in it. Works just as well.
Does a pretty good job on those acoustics, for sure. Now, this performance is incredible, and it definitely comes at an apt time in the game. You're absolutely right. It's a good one. It's a really good one, but if I were directing the Spike Video Game Awards from 2011, or if I were voting, I would honestly pick number 5 as the better song.
Well, before I get to that, I just want to point out, this song made such an impact on me, like in my life. 2 semesters ago, I had to do a project, and I had a classmate record some guitar and another classmate record vocals, and I actually mixed a cover of this song. So, big fan of this song.
Gonna build that wall up to the sky. Gonna build that wall up to the sky.
But I don't disagree with you. Number 5, which was also nominated for Best Song at the Spike Game Awards that year, is Setting Sail, Coming Home.
Clouds are making way for me. I'm
So it's kind of incredible how last episode we talk about Wind Waker's staff credits, and it's like it's on that top 10 list of best endings of all time. This one is also on that list of top 10 best ending songs of all time.
Oh yeah, so obviously it's the end credits music of Bastion, as you probably gathered. And it's a combination of the song Mother I'm Here, which is not on this list, unfortunately, though it's very good. Again, it was really hard to pick these 5 songs. And Build That Wall later on coming in to be the perfect duet. When you listen to it, you sort of start to realize that like it's a duet that's mixing a song about peace and getting to go home finally, because a big part of the character Zulf's motivation is I was in the city and then the war ended and my people, like any Ura in the city, weren't allowed to leave anymore. And so I didn't get to go home. So this is a song about finally getting to go home, finally getting to go be with your family, getting to go be with your friends, your people, mixed with a song about, well, we're going to show them. We're taking down that wall. They're going down. It's an interesting dynamic, aside from just being a really, really well-recorded duet. Oh, this is such a good song.
It's as you said, it's these 2 songs that on their own are very powerful, very well done. And then they merge so beautifully. And obviously, intended and written that way. Like, let's be honest, like that's how it's planned out from the get-go. But as you reveal more in-game, it's that realization, it's the end of the adventure, it's these contrasting themes that just work in perfect harmony. And it's amazing.
I wish I could have put Mother I'm Here on this list, but there's too much. There's too much
good stuff.
I would have put the entire soundtrack on this list if given the option.
Honestly, you have 2 tracks on the cutting room floor here where, like, if I had to pick my favorite songs, both of those 2 are in the top 5. So as far as just like what I like from a soundtrack, what I like for my music palette tastes and all that. But no, I agree. Your list is good. As again, we want to talk about the range and what is offered on the soundtrack to kind of give the overall sort of feel for the soundtrack. Not just like, these are my favorite songs, these are the best songs, but the 5 most deserving critical tracks. But your 2 here are my favorites up there. Number 1 is Setting Sail Coming Home. Let's be up and down the line about that. 100%. But I mean, your 2 here, I love them.
Well, before I get to my 2, what 2 would you put on the cutting room floor?
They aren't as strong, but I think just ones that also stand out to me. I'd pick A Proper Story.
That's a really good one.
It's kind of like, In Case of Trouble in a way, but it's more of kind of that continuing higher level with using the acoustic guitar and sort of building the narrative and building the journey. And then I would also put Been the Breaker.
Again, a very good pick. They're all good picks. What am I saying?
Yeah, I mean it's all a good soundtrack, but I think it's almost that like water-like sort of melody that goes on with this kind of muted string, and then kind of with it's a pounding, driving beat, and it's when we talk about like that trip hop sort of idea, it's like very mechanical in a way, which
it's tense too.
Yeah, it's definitely tense, but it makes sense in that apocalyptic world of things building. So the mechanics sort of make sense, but it's a powerful one though. I love your 2 choices though, and I'm sad that they didn't make the top 5, but I think it's a really good list though.
Well, the first one, it was a real big toss up between this and Slinger's Song because I think they both sort of portray the same feel, but Slinger's Song just barely won out. being Spike and a Rail, which is my favorite non-vocal song on the soundtrack. It's so good.
Yeah, you're right. These two are very similar, definitely with their instrumentation and how they sound overall. But yeah, it's more powerful, but Slinger Song is more fitting to the theming.
Mm-hmm. And then you've got another one of my favorite non-vocal songs on the album, and one of the most unique songs on the album, in my opinion, being Mine, Windbag Mine. Which, like, they use pickaxe hits as the beat. That's so cool.
It's incredible.
It's such a unique idea, and it's so cool.
And it's heavy, man. Like, it bumps. Absolutely.
So what will I never forget about Bastion? It's gonna be the music. I know it's weird to say that in a show about talking about the music, because that's not necessarily what we're asking usually, but it's gotta be the music. The music sells this game. Music and the narrator.
Yeah, and that's why, to me, it's the narrator. Obviously, the music is a huge part of it. And the narrative as a whole isn't the biggest part of the story. Like, yeah, it makes sense. Like, it's what ties everything together.
Mm-hmm. And I like the world that it describes.
But it's not like the thing you'll always remember. It's not like any big reveals or anything like that. It's the journey you have with the narrator kind of, guiding your way in a sense. And then it's the music that accompanies it. Yeah, it's remarkable. And I think we don't, give it enough credit earlier when we talked about it, but the narrator was a huge deal at the time. And there have been very few games that have emulated it properly since.
Yeah, I can't actually even think of one, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure a couple have, but yeah, it's tough just off the top of the head, so.
And that about does it for us, I think.
Yeah. Another good week talking about soundtracks that we love. So give us recommendations. What would you like us to talk about? Or give us feedback on the show. We're on social media at Soundchat OST. So that'll be a good place to reach out to us there. As far as us personally, you can find me on Twitter at Pete Speakeasy. Our video versions of the show will go up on rhymeswithasia.com and the YouTube channel, Rhymes with Asia. So talk to me about games. Joe and I just beat Kingdom Hearts 3, so talk to us about that.
It's a good game.
Yeah, it is a good game. Where can people find you?
They can find me on Twitter at the DeVader, though I don't use it very often. At least I try not to use it very often. But I'm there. You can find me. You can contact me. You can also find not only my other shows, but the podcast audio feed for this show on anondino.squarespace.com. That is anon as in anonymous, dino.squarespace.com. That's where you can find my other show, Masterpieces. That's really all. You can find me on Twitch at Detective DeVader. I play there sometimes with video games.
Mm-hmm. Next week, we'll have another good slate of games ready for you, but let's play us out on this one.
For the playout song, I had a lot of trouble finding. I kind of wanted to try and find something that wasn't one of the vocal songs, but that's not a thing you can find. So I decided to compromise with myself, and since I couldn't put Mother I'm Here on this list at all, I decided I'll just grab a cover for it. So I wanted to go ahead and throw in Golden Sounds, which is not a channel I'm familiar with, but it was a very good cover he had of Mother I'm Here, a vocal/synth cover. Very good. So give that a listen.
Absolutely. For Joe, I'm Peter. We'll see you next time on Original Sound Chat. Take care.
I set myself, fly the wind, it will take me back to my